Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Center for the Middle Market's Year-End 2022 webinar. Throughout the webinar, we will provide a detailed explanation of the current performance, sentiment, and trends in the middle market sector based on our semi-annual middle market indicator, which is a survey of 1,000 mid-sized companies across the United States. My name is Kim Rosler, and I will be monitoring the Q&A function today. Feel free to drop any questions you have in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen at any point throughout the presentation. We will do our best to answer each question. Also, please note that this session is being recorded. It will be uploaded to the center's website for future on-demand viewing. And now, I am pleased to introduce the National Center for the Middle Market's Managing Director, Doug Farren.
Thanks, Kim, and welcome everyone to this overview of the Middle Market Indicator Report. As Kim mentioned, my name is Doug Farren. I'm the Managing Director here at the NCMM, and we are coming to you today live from the snowy campus at Ohio State University. So hard to believe we're already into 1 month into 2023. But thought it'd be a great time to share these insights from our semi-annual survey. So again, welcome. I do encourage you to submit questions if you have them. Probably take about 40 minutes or so to run through a lot of the data and the key insights. And then we should have some time at the end to field any questions that come up. So our agenda for today's session, whether you're a returning visitor or have followed the middle market indicator for a number of years, this is actually our 38th wave. It's hard to believe that we just wrapped up our 11th full year here at the NCMM. So whether you've been a longtime follower or you're new to it, I always like to start off with telling you a little bit about the center, about how we define the middle market, and of course, how we collect this data. We'll first look into a lot of the performance from 2022, some of the sentiment, some of the key indicators and metrics that we look at via the MMI. We'll talk a little bit about what does 2023 look like, specifically projections around revenue and employment. And then finally, diving into some of the key headwinds that are out there right now, mainly around the macroeconomic conditions that all businesses are experiencing and what that means for the middle market. And then the ongoing challenge of workforce and talent. And as I said, we'll wrap up with some final closing comments and some Q&A as they're submitted. So the National Center for the Middle Market, as I mentioned, we're founded in 2011. We are a partnership with Chubb, who's the world's largest commercially traded insurance company, and Visa. So we work together on a number of different research platforms, programs, activities, all in support of the U.S. middle market. That includes the Middle Market Indicator. It includes topical research studies. Last year, for example, we did a study with Fifth Third Bank on business owner transitions in the middle market. We've got some exciting new projects teed up for this year that I'll mention briefly at the end of today's webinar. We also do programs, a lot of outreach, engagements, events, partnerships with groups around the country, whether they be chambers of commerce, industry organizations, all sharing an interest in making sure that, first and foremost, the middle market is recognized for its contribution to our economy, but is also properly supported in its growth. How do we define the middle market? Again, understanding that there's different definitions out there, different organizations look at these businesses in their own unique way. But for the NCMM, we have remained steady in our definition of annual revenues between 10 million and $1 billion. We understand that that's a massive range. And so within a lot of our research, particularly within the MMI, we do take different revenue cuts. So for instance, 10 million to 50 million in revenue represents for us the lower middle market businesses that tend to be more family owned, that tend to behave like smaller businesses. Whereas at 100 million and above, for us, our upper middle market, those companies would start to resemble enterprises in terms of technology, in terms of leadership, in terms of multi-location, perhaps even international, some of the characteristics. Roughly 200,000 or so businesses fit this description again. We landed on this definition based on the middle third of the US economy, so both private sector GDP and employment. And again, about 85% or so of the company's privately held. So, data is often very difficult to come across, which is actually why we created this middle market indicator survey, which I'll talk about here next. So again, if you're not familiar with the MMI, it is a national survey of financial decision makers. So we are mainly targeting executives, owners, founders, CEOs, CFOs, those leaders who really have a pulse on not only the direction and the performance of the business, but also some of the financial metrics as well, and employment and things like that. It's administered via an online survey. This data that I'm sharing today was collected in the first 3 weeks of December. And then we just published our middle market indicator report here at the end of January. So relatively fresh data, kind of hot off the press, and excited to kind of share the latest and greatest on the middle market with you all. I should note that this data gets weighted to the US Census. So it's reflective of size companies, of industry makeup, as well as geographic makeup. So that just helps guarantee that it truly is a representative of the US middle market. So let's dive right into what's new with the middle market and what's going on, particularly in 2022, and then as we head into this new year. One of the nice things about having so much historical data now at our fingertips is we can, go back in time quite a bit and look at some of the trends and look at some of the historical performance and really start to make those comparisons at different points in time. So what I'm showing here first is at a very, very high level. We ask these leaders, just give us your own perspective on company performance this year versus where you were a year ago. And as you can see, it's fairly strong, right? Over 70% of the companies are saying their performance has improved versus a year ago. That's higher than the historical average, which has been around 63 or so percent. Other than those two dips that you see there, which are related to the start of the pandemic, I think the message that you'll see in this data today is that we're really starting to move away from that. We talked last year, both at the 2021 year end as well as the mid-year, about an ongoing recovery in the middle market. And I can certainly think we can make the statement that has come pretty much full circle. The middle market is churning along. It's doing very well, despite some new headwinds, right? We've been thinking about and seeing the impacts of both inflation, supply chain disruptions, certainly. Talent has been an ongoing issue. And then in this latest wave, we also asked about how these leaders were thinking about a potential recession, which certainly there's a lot of debate about that, but appears to be a possibility in this upcoming year. So very, very consistent. You'll see in a lot of these trends charts, other than the 1 year dip in 2020, where we saw, again, our entire society was impacted by a global pandemic that we hadn't seen in over 100 years. Other than that dip, though, you'll see a lot of consistency, which has been a hallmark of the middle market since we've been studying it starting in 2011. This is our main dashboard, so we can get into some of these numbers, and I'll certainly go into some of them in a little bit more detail. Starting on the left, we look at revenue growth, robust 12.2%. You compare that to the S&P 500, 4.4%, so certainly outpacing there, and projected to be strong again for the coming year at 10% top line revenue growth. Shifting to employment, also very strong. These are matching some of the highest numbers that we've had in the MMI, 11.1% average employment growth. We compare to ADP. Again, that's our proxy data source for looking at growth across both small business and large business. Those are based on headcount, but as I said, it's a fairly good proxy. There are going to be some differences by industry, and we recognize that, but small business growing at less than 2% and large business at about 5%. And this is again in the last 12 months. Forecasted employment growth, same as revenue growth, 10%. So what we're seeing here is very strong performance, projected to remain strong despite some of those headwinds that I talked about, and we're going to get into that here later on. Capital investment, again, we asked this question in the form of, if you had an additional dollar of revenue, what would you do with that dollar? 55% of the companies saying they would invest it. The other 45% are saying they would save it either as cash or they would hold it for some future investment. But due to various factors, whether it's uncertainty or just wanting to remain a little bit more conservative with that capital, they would hang on to it for now. We're going to look at that trend as well, and it continues to lag behind some of the both performance as well as increase in confidence. So that's a good segue into the confidence numbers on the right. So 73% of companies saying that they're have a degree of confidence in the global economy as of the end of last year, 74% for the US economy, and 86% for the local economy. These are better numbers, certainly an improvement over what we saw in the summer, and we'll take a look at that here in a moment. But this is the typical makeup of these numbers. The local confidence is always the strongest for the middle market because it's where they tend to operate and have their customers and their suppliers and the area that they know best. Let's start to get into then a little bit more of the detail around these numbers. So if we look at the revenue, as I said, 12.2 as the average growth rate, far out, 3 times the S&P 500 growth rate. You can see here now, this has been consistent over the last 3 waves. So even going back to a year ago when the growth was pretty much the same, 12.3%, we are now seeing a level of consistency and stabilization in these growth rates. And of course, they're off to the far right. You can see the projection for this coming year at 10%. The average over this time period, this is a 5-year view that I'm showing you here, about 8.5%. If you took out the 2 COVID years, the average would be about 10%. So right where they're projecting, these businesses are projecting for 2023. And as far as how this growth is distributed, it remains strong across the board, particularly in those high growers, the 10% or more year-over-year growers. You can see, that this arrow is trying to portray the fact that that group has continued to grow and then now has stabilized over the last couple of rounds of this survey. So 80% of the businesses are saying, yes, our revenue has grown. Only about 10% have experienced a revenue decrease. And that is all obviously combining into an average rate of 12.2%. So it's good to see this because then across the different bands where the growth is actually happening. We have to acknowledge that part of this is related to inflation, because as we know, and as we'll see here is in some of the data we asked around, response to inflationary environment, one of the things that these businesses are doing are increasing their costs or their rates or their prices as a direct result of the increase in their own raw materials and the cost of doing business. So definitely recognize that part of this is inflationary influenced, but there's also a growth story here, which we can also see via some of the economic expansion activity. Revenue growth by industry. So there's really 3 that I've highlighted here, kind of leading the pack in terms of their performance in revenue. Financial services, banks, financial institutions, insurance providers in the middle market, close to 20% year-over-year revenue growth, followed by retail trade. Again, traditional retailers, restaurants, those types of establishments. And then third would be business services. Construction, not far behind at over 11%. And you can see, most of those are projecting to continue to remain strong in the coming year, led by retail, financial services, and then construction. I mentioned expansionary activity. So, that the influences of what's going on in the macroeconomic environment, we certainly acknowledge, but we also want to know where organic growth and expansion may be happening at these firms. So this is a trend that tracks where businesses have engaged in expansion over the prior 12 months. So you look at activity in 2022, highlighted by introducing a new product and services. About half of the businesses are saying that they engaged in that activity, which is an uptick from the summer, but down a little bit from maybe a year ago. Again, we've got some headwinds that are causing these firms to be a little bit more cautious, but expanding into new domestic markets remains relatively strong. Almost 40% of the companies saying that they took part in that. And then a little bit lower down in terms of the percentages, adding a new plant or facility or investing in kind of hard assets. About a quarter of the businesses saying they've done that. And then taking on new debt. I mean, certainly as we've seen interest rates rise pretty sharply throughout 2022, that remains below 20% of the businesses doing that to help fuel growth. Let's shift over to employment then. So again, a similar trend chart here, 11% employment growth. Again, those ADP numbers, you can see there below at 1.6 for small business, 5.1 for large business. This is all 2022 activity. So, we've all been hearing about kind of layoffs that are happening across various businesses, particularly at the start of this new year. Does not appear to be the case within the middle market. This is the highest growth rate that's been reported in the MMI. You can see the last two waves were just under 11% employment growth. So again, very strong performance there. The 5-year average, 6.7%. And once again, if you stripped out those two waves that were largely influenced by the start of the COVID pandemic, you'd be looking at around 10% employment growth. So we've been saying for years, one of the great things about the middle market is because of the private nature of ownership and the tendency to take the longer view on business opportunities. They're more likely to be steady, consistent growers, both of top line revenue, but also of their employment base. And they recognize that it's really tough to replace good people. So much less likely to use, workforce cuts and layoffs as a tactic when times do get tough. But we'll look at some of those things that they are doing in response to some of the headwinds. Similar chart, the growth remains steady over the last couple of waves, particularly at the top end. So, 57% of the companies are saying that they've increased their workforces in the last year, which has remained pretty much flat over the summer update that we did, as well as last year. And again, the percentage that are decreasing, staying relatively flat at around 10% or so of the businesses. So just as top line revenue growth is growing across a large majority of these companies, employment growth is happening in a very similar fashion. And then we look at it by industry. So, no surprise, those big growers in revenue are also the ones that are adding most of the people. Retail, 15%, financial services over 13%, similarly with construction. And construction, recognizing some of the seasonality around that industry, is projecting really strong growth over the next year at 15.5%. So that is the leading industry in terms of who's looking to hire people in the upcoming year. But you can see across the board, pretty strong projections as we think about where the middle market is going to be adding people to support their growth. Confidence. So, last update we did in the mid-year 2022, which was released in July, we saw confidence kind of continuing to slip, after some rebounding in about mid-year 2021. We saw, 2 consecutive waves of the MMI where confidence was starting to slip. And actually, as you can see, highlighted there, the confidence levels across global, national, and local were the lowest in 6 years at the midsummer. So pleased to see that this has rebounded a bit. As I said earlier, we're back up to 86% locally, about 75%, 3/4 of the middle market saying that they're confident in the current state of the US economy, and then globally at 73%. So we're kind of back to where we were, levels that you're seeing there in 2018, 2019, which is definitely good news in terms of how the middle market is feeling going forward. However, as I mentioned, that investment activity continues to lag somewhat. So since 2020, we've seen this number, hovering around about 6 out of 10 companies saying that they would invest that additional dollar. And it's actually gone down a little bit. It's continued to slide from a year ago through our mid-year update to today. And again, as we think about some of the headwinds that are out there, we're seeing that these businesses are just continuing to react to a lot of the uncertainty by potentially pulling back and delaying investments in their business. On the flip side, though, they are thinking about ways to create more efficiency in their operations, resulting in lower costs and efficiencies across the board. And that may turn into some increased investment across technology and their own digital transformation journeys. So where are those dollars going? There's always kind of a jockeying amongst these different investment opportunities from wave to wave. In the summer, it was IT, 23% of the companies saying that would be their area to invest, followed by personnel and then plant and equipment. You could see now on the right, plant and equipment has kind of taken over the number one spot in terms of where investment dollars would be focused in the future, in the upcoming year. But I would say people have remained, whether it's adding more people, training, that always seems to be top of mind, because as we'll get into this later on in the presentation, the talent and workforce issue has remained a significant challenge. So what's next? As we shift and start to think about a little bit about the projections for 2023, revenue growth, 10%. It's the highest projection we've seen over the last 2 years or so. It should be net. So how do we compare these numbers to actual performance? Well, the projections of the last 3 waves, 9.8, 9.9, 9.1, the actual results were all in the 12 plus range. So there's a bit of inflationary impact. There's a bit of conservatism, right? Because we know that historically there's been a kind of an under projection, both in terms of revenue growth and employment growth. It just tends to be the nature of these leaders that they under promise and over deliver, so to speak. So 10%, a lot of optimism there, a lot of looking towards strong growth for 2023. And then similarly, same number, ironically, 10% employment growth over the coming year, which is on par with the last couple of waves. So I always kind of make the caveat that it's interesting to see how these numbers will shake out as there continues to be a war for talent, companies struggling to find the right people, particularly the ones that have the right skills for their business. And so attraction, retention, development, all these issues continue to be challenging for a good number of middle market companies. And so then as we make that transition into thinking about what are the biggest challenges over the next couple months, far and away, we've got these 2 really broad categories of core business issues and then talent management. And you can see cost and economy are certainly on this list, but much, much lower percentage saying it's going to be one of their key challenges. So let's start to double click down on this a little bit and get into some of the more detailed data that we've collected around what some of these issues look like. So starting with the core business issues, inflation. Inflation's an interesting one because it's polarizing from the standpoint that some of the companies are telling us it's having a positive effect on their companies. And certainly, others saying it's had a negative impact or continues to have a negative impact. As to where we were 6 months ago, we're seeing a little bit more negativity. went from 39% now up to 41%, saying that inflation is having a negative impact on their business. Also a higher number saying that there's been no impact on their business. So it'll be interesting to continue to follow this trend as the Fed and, there's been obviously steps taken to try to get this under control. We're not there yet. And certainly this data would suggest that there's continuing to be an ongoing impact in the middle market. What's interesting, though, is that the most significant impact has now shifted from fuel costs, which in the summer was 50% of the companies who had been negatively impacted were saying that was the number one impact, followed by the cost of goods and raw materials, and then wages. We're now seeing wages and salaries emerge as kind of the biggest negative impact to the business, right? In response to cost, whether it's cost of living increases or wanting to, again, retain your best people, nearly 50% of the companies are saying that they've been forced to respond appropriately. And fuel has, as we've seen kind of prices at the pump go down, that's become less of an issue. And you see some of the others on this list as well. The tactics have remained largely the same. So the actions that are being taken to deal with inflation, again, the same percentage of companies are telling us, well, we're just going to raise our prices and rates in response, right? It's costing us more. So we're just going to pass that along to the customer. That is far and away the number one tactic. You can see followed by paying higher wages and salaries to make sure that the talent and the workforce remain in place. Delaying capital investments, that percentage has gone up a little bit now. Close to 4 out of 10 companies saying that that's what they're doing in response to the environment. And then some other things around working with suppliers on contracts and re-examining insurance and some of those other things. So pretty much, similar response as we've seen over the last, 12 months, actually. What are the actions that are being taken? So again, cutting costs and seeking operational efficiency continues to lead the way. That can result in a number of different things, right? It's not just simply cutting budgets, but it's actually looking at where you can be better at doing what you're doing. That may involve technology. It may involve doing things, again, that drive more operational efficiency within the business. 30% saying they're pulling back on hiring. It's an interesting number when we look at those strong employment growth numbers as well as the projections. But a third of the companies saying that they are going to continue to kind of maybe pull back a little bit on hiring, delaying an introduction of new products and services. Again, back to that expansionary chart that I shared, we saw that 51% of the companies had introduced a new product or service this year. That number may continue to decrease as a result of inflation and then delaying additional capital investment. But they're sitting at number 5 on the list, accelerating digital transformation. I think that's an interesting one to note because we've done some work in the past with different studies that have looked at the digital transformation journey for the middle market, and it looks like that's going to be something that's going to continue to accelerate, particularly given some of the challenges around finding people. So is that robotics and automation for certain industries? Is it, introduction of AI using other tools and other platforms? We'll see, but the center is going to be continuing to look at that in 2023 and beyond, just as we started some of the digital work back in 2019. Recession. So, we weren't quite ready to insert this into the survey in the summer, but we were now. Just knowing that this is top of mind for a lot of businesses, large, small, middle market. So again, we wanted to get a sense for how leaders were thinking about a potential recession. It's just as polarizing as the inflation question. There's some good, there's some bad. You can see 4 out of 10 companies think it would have a positive impact for them, and almost the same amount saying it would be a negative impact. And similar to the inflationary tactics, the actions that would be undertaken in the face of a recession, cutting expenses via the budget, conserving cash, cutting expenses, leaving open positions unfilled. So it's a lot of the same things that we've already mentioned and discussed. None of them too surprising. All of them kind of the traditional levers that would get pulled in the face of a lot of uncertainty, and certainly in the face of, maybe uncertain customer demand and prospects for growth. However, a bit of good news that I did want to share, the supply chain issue appears to be improving. We started looking at this a few waves ago. Probably the summer of 2021 is when this started to surface. That's when we saw a lot of stories around, holiday inventory and goods that were getting stuck, that weren't making it to their final, store shelves for the holiday season 2021. So we started looking at this, and I'm pleased to report that it, at least it appears for a number of companies, this is becoming less of an issue. Disruptions are going down, particularly in the last 6 months. Now we only have, 4 out of 10 companies saying they were disrupted. Still not great, but certainly an improvement over the 55% of companies who told us that they had experienced a disruption, in the first half of last year. Construction is the one industry where this continues to be prevalent, close to 60% saying that they have continued to experience disruptions in the latter half of 2022. Why is that? What are the challenging aspects that continue to bubble up? Well, it's the globalization aspect, relying on global suppliers, the complexity, the size and scale. We've done studies in the past where we've clearly noted that the middle market is usually a link within the supply chain of larger businesses. Well, this just demonstrates that they have their own supply chain challenges and issues to manage. And particularly around globalization, where there's issues, whether it be geopolitical in Eastern Europe or port issues, transportation issues. There's just a number of things that are contributing here. But again, those are the ones that remain most vexing for these businesses. And then another new data point to share, what has been changing. So one thing we've seen is connectivity, whether that be, data sharing, using technology to become more connected. That is on the rise, both for their own suppliers as well with their customers. So you can see, about 36% have said it's increased connectivity with their suppliers over the last year. 4 out of 10 companies saying they're more connected now with their customers. So that'll be interesting for us to watch. And then back to that globalization of the supply chain, at least in manufacturing. And again, this isn't just the manufacturing industry. We asked this of all respondents. Are they doing more to reshore, to bring manufacturing back to the US, or to work with more domestically based suppliers? And that certainly appears to be the case. Close to half of our respondents said that they are, yes, in fact, doing more domestic manufacturing than they were a year ago. And they're also working with more of these, local and domestically based suppliers, which again could help to minimize some of the disruptions. And the tactics that we saw over the last, couple surveys, again, pointed to supplier diversification as one of the things that more companies were looking to do, instead of just relying on that one key supplier, which does have benefits of a deeper, more collaborative relationship. It does increase the risk. If that supplier, has an outage or goes under for a week or two, that's serious disruptions down the chain. So that is certainly in line with things we've been hearing over the last year and a half. Talent issues. So again, about a quarter of the middle market are saying that they do not have the right size workforce for their current market conditions. So that's, putting them in a position to think about future growth, about fulfilling current demand. 1 in 4 companies don't have enough people. So it's improved slightly as you can see, but it's still an issue that's top of mind for a lot of businesses. And not only is it just about people, it's the right people, right? So finding the people with the right skill sets, this has remained consistently high. So if you roll up all of those different aspects of being challenged, close to 50% are extremely challenged by this issue. over 90% are challenged in some way. And it's again about not just finding and attracting the right, attracting people in general, but making sure they have the right skill sets. And if they don't, then that's forcing these businesses to look a lot at investing in their own training and development programs and making sure that their workforce has the right skills, whether it's digital skills, technical skills, so on and so forth. And then the impacts, again, no surprise, they're widespread. The impact of not having the right people in place, having the right workforce in place, forcing the current team to work longer hours, more shifts, taking on more of the workload. Inflation certainly driving cost of living and merit increases, maybe bringing in contractors, less so than maybe some of the other issues, but again, close to 3 in 10 companies are saying they're bringing in either contractors, maybe doing some outsourcing, relying on consultants and some other things to kind of fill this gap. We don't have the answers, right? I mean, this has been brought to the forefront for a number of years now. And so, as we think about ways that middle market companies can address this, we've got some work out there, again, done previously around building a good employee value proposition, having an employer brand. But look, it's a challenge, right? I mean, everyone's out there battling for people. So it's going to continue to be an issue for middle market companies, how they differentiate themselves from other employees. And it's not just about wage and salary. It could be other benefits and total compensation as well, but a lot of issues to kind of sort through there. Wages. So wages are continuing to be on the rise, no surprise there. From 6 months ago, roughly the same number of companies are saying they've continued to increase wages. On average, it's been about 6%. I think our latest inflation is somewhere like 8 or 9%. So still under what we're experiencing in broader inflation, but yeah, close to 6% is the reported average increase. And then on the right, you can see some of the things that have been done previously and some of the things that are being planned in the future. I think across the board, this just tells us that companies are continuing to reevaluate in the middle market what they're doing around flexible work, around changing requirements in training, around, transitioning to other alternatives. I mean, look at that very top one, where we've got about 35% of the companies saying tech and automation may be the route that we choose to pursue in order to address, some of the people related issues with the right skill sets, technical, digital, and so forth. So you see a number of different activities that companies are thinking about doing over the coming year. And again, none of them really are any of a surprise, but this just allows us to kind of keep a pulse on what's happening in the middle market workforce. So in summary, the middle market, again, I just want to go back to that word consistency. If you take out that 1 year of the pandemic, we are definitely seeing consistent growth across both revenue, employment. Confidence has made a sharp rebound. Again, it's only one wave, so we can't quite call it a trend yet. And there's a lot of this uncertainty that I just covered that's clouding some of that, particularly around investment planning. But the projections do remain fairly strong. Thinking about technological investments, driving efficiency, attracting and retaining talent, these are going to be, again, the issues to note for the coming year. Of course, inflation and a potential recession are what are, I would say, keeping leaders up at night. While supply chain, while not entirely solved and may never entirely be solved, at least has shown improvement in the number of businesses that are being disrupted, at least across some of the industries that we track. And then finally, I'd say digital transformation continues to be a long-term strategy that these businesses will continue to pursue, whether it's a full-blown transformation or it's a journey that they've already been on, kind of continuing to address what investments they make into their business to make sure that they're prepared for immediate as well as long-term future growth. One thing I just wanted to mention really quickly, just a quick pitch, so to speak, and it's around NCMM membership. It's a program that we launched late summer of 2022. So I don't believe I had the chance to talk about this in our last webinar, but we really designed an opportunity for mid-sized companies who were looking to get involved in the work of the center. It's a membership that's designed to provide more access to detailed data, like I just presented, but even further, like we have the ability to go into much deeper detail, whether it's by industry or geography or ownership type or size, access to some of that data, NCMM programming, certainly our student base here, if you're looking for talent, whether it's internships or entry-level roles, and more. So if that's of interest, I would encourage you to visit our webpage. We've got a page called Work With Us where there's different opportunities on there. And we have an information sheet and a form if you'd be interested in talking to us about the membership program. So with that, I am going to open it up to see if we've had questions submitted, and it does look like we've had some questions. Let me just. I'll go back to a question that was submitted around Intel. So for those of us in Ohio, I mean, Intel's been the big story for a year. It's about a question around microprocessor manufacturing capabilities. Has that benefited middle market companies in construction, automation, those types of things? The short answer is yes. I mean, even for us here locally, we're already preparing for an influx of suppliers who are going to co-locate with the two Intel fabrication facilities that are being built here in Central Ohio. Those won't go operational until 2025, I believe. But believe me, there are literally hundreds of people who are spending all of their time talking about how we address infrastructure, workforce. I know Intel's been talking with the university about building programming around this. So I think we're definitely going to see, at least regionally and locally for us here in Ohio, those types of impacts. And I would think there would be similar middle market benefits across the country for different industries. So yeah, great question. What are the top skills missing? Great question. So we don't have a list of those. We don't collect the data necessarily, but I would say anecdotally, in a lot of the sessions and discussions I have, whether they're focus groups or sessions that we present at, I think it's depends on the industry certainly, but as we move to a lot of technologically focused work, that's where I've heard a lot of the issues, right? So having the right abilities to work in the cloud, for example, having the skill sets to be able to manage data analytics, right? Up and coming kind of a focus on that. Even here at Ohio State, we've continued to build out a lot of capabilities around data analytics, classes and certifications and programs, not only for undergraduates and graduate students, but for working professionals. So that to me has been an overarching theme, but then you can even get into specifics. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we'll hear from, manufacturing companies who say, we just can't hire enough welders to work in our plants, or we can't hire enough technicians who can keep our equipment and innovate, our operations running. So I think it's kind of across the board. It is a very interesting question, but those are some of the areas where we see a lot of the skills gap happening. Let's see. Let's find another one here. Trying to go back and answer these in order. We can't answer all these, by the way. We'll definitely get these noted and respond significantly. Let's see. Do we see evidence of founder owners being worn out from the past 3 years and accelerating their desire to exit? So yeah, outside of the MMI, I referenced some work that we did on business owner transitions. That was in collaboration with the Fifth Third Private Bank. Certainly there are a couple of variables at play here. I mean, one is kind of a baby boom bubble, right? Founders, owners that are getting to that stage of life where it's like, hey, I'm either going to pass this down to my family, or if that's not an option, I'm going to exit the business. I'm going to find the right seller, or I may explore private equity. There's a lot of activity. I mean, we saw some record levels of activity. I think there's still a lot of investment dollars sitting on the sidelines, kind of waiting to be put to use. So how that impacts the middle market, I think there's going to be a pretty ripe environment for M&A, certainly in the near future, but it's something that we looked at a little bit in that study. We looked at kind of the preparation process, how many years that takes, going through the process, and then afterwards, kind of what were the results and what did they learn and what was the satisfaction? Because again, 90% of these businesses privately held, and particularly for founders, owners, they may only go through that process once or twice. So it's really about finding the right advisors and help through that. But I think it's going to continue to be a really strong market around M&A. Question around thoughts around applicability to the Canadian market. We've talked about that in the past. Our focus has really been US per our mission and vision statement. And again, that has been the focus, but could certainly see, how we could pretty quickly and pretty easily go into maybe like a North American focus. So that's something we're going to continue to evaluate. I can't make any promises on when or if that data would ever become available, but it has been discussed. So it's something we're going to continue to evaluate. Let's see. Does your data include margin, debt load, and debt service coverage? No, it does not. Unfortunately, it does not collect any of that data. Did you drop tracking PE versus other? No, we still have that information, but just chose to focus on some different data points this time around. So we can definitely share that if there's a specific interest in wanting to know some of the private equity cut information. Here's a great question. In our work with the mid-market, do we see ESG issues as an area of focus? Do companies see ESG as simply a compliance issue, or do they see it as a significant financial risk and a source of competitiveness? We've kicked this around, actually. I know we had some debate about whether to insert some things around ESG. These are the type of topical issues, quite honestly, that we have looked at in the past. A few years ago, we looked at diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example. I think ESG is a strong possibility. But we always have to balance that against the length of the survey. So didn't make the cut this time. But personally, I would say right now, anecdotally, what I'm hearing is that it's mainly just a compliance issue, that it's not seen as a source of competitiveness. Now, that doesn't mean that's not necessarily the case. We would have to explore that a little further and would like to collect some data on that. But I think it's a really interesting topic. It is starting to become more prevalent and certainly could be a candidate for future surveys, whether it's within the middle market indicator or maybe something that's done on its own, but definitely an interesting area. Question around refreshing the general middle market size and scope. That's a great one. I mean, one thing is we get a lot of questions around like lists, right? Can we get a list of, or even the number, right? Tell us all the middle market companies in California or Texas or Florida. We don't maintain that, unfortunately. I think the closest you would be able to ever get to something like that, and this is when we launched the center, we actually relied on data from the US Census, but of course that's all rolled up and de-identified. That's another thing that's probably on our to-do list, looking forward, is to do a full refresh on some of that demographic information, because we've been relying on the same kind of data set for a number of years. So that is a to-do for us, is to do a refresh on the look, but unfortunately we don't maintain any type of state-related specific data or lists. A lot of times I'll look at some of the data providers that are out there, like a Dun & Bradstreet, for example. There are some others that serve as sources for that information, but yeah, certainly it falls on our wish list of things that we'd like to do. Yeah, our middle market companies tempering growth plans when reconsidering debt given current economic conditions. Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing, reflected in the data around some of the conservatism, around the lower numbers, the lagging investment plans, maybe a little bit of decline in expansionary activity. So yeah, I mean, we saw for years that the dollar was essentially free, right? We had close to zero interest rates. So borrowing to drive growth was a lot easier in those conditions. But as we've done some work over the years as well, we know that a good number of middle market companies kind of tend to fund their own growth, right? Through their profits and through their own retained earnings, so to speak. So when they were going out to take on debt, most of it was through kind of traditional banking relationships. So loans, lines of credit, those types of things. Have seen an increase in, looking at other sorts of capital like private equity. So that remains, a favorable opportunity for middle market companies. Yeah, but certainly, some of the uncertainty coming in with whether it's a recession or what's going to happen with inflation and what's going to happen with interest rates certainly could be muting some of those plans for increasing debt. Let's see, got some other ones here. How concerned are middle market leaders about the importance of middle management or frontline leaders? Great question. Not necessarily a part of the middle market indicator survey, but I mentioned some of the work we've done previously around talent management. I think this is a huge area of opportunity, quite honestly. When we've done some work with our HR faculty, we did a couple of reports on managing talent in the middle market, on talent attraction, the various elements of it. That is a big opportunity to think about how do you incorporate some of the, basic best practices that you see in a lot of enterprise organizations, right? Like identifying your top talent, 9-block evaluations, right? With the criteria around performance and potential. Certainly there are businesses that are doing that, but could be much more prevalent across middle market companies, at least from the work that we did in past years. We found that wasn't always the case, where there weren't, for example, annual talent reviews taking place within these companies to not only, ensure that you're developing your kind of next round of successors, right? Like keeping your future leaders, but also are you making sure that you're developing them properly and addressing some of those retention challenge issues? So yeah, huge opportunity there. I think some of it boils down to just, a little bit of lack of sophistication, maybe not having the right tools in place, maybe not thinking that it's as important. And I think it's important to note too, it doesn't have to be super formal. We talk to companies who are like, oh, we don't have the time or the resources to put together talent books and maintain all this information, but it doesn't have to be, that difficult of a process. I think it's just carving out a little bit of time to think through some of those development issues. And then, hopefully that does create more of a pipeline toward promotional opportunities and maintaining some of those top players in the company. So, question about how scary is M&A and PE investment for owners of middle market firms? So we don't directly deal with this, but through some of the work we've done with groups like ACG and the owner transition study with Fifth Third. I mean, I think anecdotally, to answer the question, it is a daunting process. It's one of those things, again, because you don't necessarily go through that many times in your career, where the middle market owner can feel at a disadvantage, right? Not having the right information, not knowing the right questions to ask. Whereas the M&A firm does this day in and day out, right? So a significant advantage when it comes to kind of expertise around the process, which makes it all the more important to have the right advisors at the table, right? So in that work, we asked who those advisors are. It's typically, your banker, your lawyer, your accountant, maybe having like a wealth professional if there's going to be a significant capital event. But those things can help prepare the owner. It might take 24 months. I think we saw on average, it was about an 18-month preparation process, but some companies said it took them as long as 3 years. So I think it's just being prepared helps remove some of the scariness, so to speak. But yeah, great question. And, as more businesses think about approaching this, something that they should definitely educate themselves on. Yeah, just got a question here about following up on the shortage of labor. Are companies considering hiring to train and providing their own in-house training? So certainly, I mean, that was in that kind of the additional dollar pie charts. We saw interest in kind of creating in-house development training programs. So yeah, if you can't find the right people, it's kind of like create your own workforce, right? But the challenge there becomes the resources. So who are you getting to develop that training? Who's delivering the training? Who's continuing to monitor, the training needs? I think there's a stat out there from SHRM where it's something like one HR professional per 75 employees is kind of the general metric for a lot of businesses. And so if you look at a middle market company that's got 200 or 300 employees, they may only have an HR team of 2 to 3 people, right? If that metric holds true. So they're addressing probably a lot of transactional things, right? Paychecks and taxes and, so it gets into the question of, are you being strategic around some of your HR? Or are you being more tactical? So yeah, definitely an opportunity though, to think about doing that training internally, or maybe outsourcing that to a training firm to be able to address some of those challenges. So great question. I think we're at the hour, so I know there's a lot on here we haven't been able to address. Hopefully we can follow up and get back to those who have submitted questions that we weren't able to talk about here in the session. Again, appreciate the time. We're looking forward to a great year here at the center. We've got a number of projects in the pipeline that I think will be interesting to a lot of our audiences. So continue to remain engaged, reach out to us with questions. And again, we just appreciate all the support and interest in the U.S. middle market. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.